This is a very compressed version of something that has not been written yet. So it's called Aaron Neville's Voice. When I came to Williams in 1980, I had a decision to make about the direction of my scholarship. Should I convert my dissertation, called Portrayal of Black Protagonists by White Novelists in the 1920s, into a book, or should I embark upon a new project? The dissertation had already answered the historical questions that interested me. What remained unresolved was a fundamental question about race. Why, I wondered, was such a patently erroneous concept so thoroughly ineradicable? I abandoned the dissertation project and spent the next 12 years writing a book called Racial Writing, Black and White. Though I completed it during my year at the National Humanities Center in 1993, I never submitted it for publication. It contained some of my best writing, including innovative readings of the racial dynamics in many texts, but my immodest intention was to incapacitate racial discourse. Unfortunately, as I lectured and published essays based on this work, I realized that other scholars embraced my analyses, but not the underlying critique of race. Indeed, the process of writing the book made me realize why race is so tenacious and enduring. Therefore, I decided I would need a different strategy. Obviously, the American understanding of race is fatally flawed, both as a concept and as a descriptive category. American race thinking lacks a plausible account of hybridity. So it relies instead on a metaphysical dogma used to be called the one-drop rule. One drop of Negro blood makes a Negro. This absurd assertion expresses the ruthless self-aggrandizement of slave owners bent upon maximizing the profitability of owning and marketing the human beings they willfully relegated to commodity status, including their own one-drop offspring. The phenomenon that we call race is neither an idea nor a biological category. Rather, it is a social practice and a prescriptive signifier of relative social status. To put it simply, race is the manifestation of the command we have all obeyed since the imposition of chattel slavery in 1619 to regard and treat black people as inherently inferior to white people, so-called. Race persists then despite its patent wickedness and absurdity because we Americans continue to perpetuate it in our thinking, our discourse, and our actions. Other societies have their own mechanisms for assigning and denying social privilege, but none is more effective than the one called race that we invented and perfected here. This is a very compressed summary of the critique of race and racial discourse that I wrote in the 1980s. This line of inquiry led me to brood increasingly over the related but quite different question of how the critique of race affects one's understanding of African American cultural production and what I began to call American blackness. I wrote some articles on this problem, best known of which was What is Black Culture?, written for the Race Matters Conference at Princeton in 1995, and subsequently published in The House That Race Built, edited by Toni Morrison and Juanima Lubiano. African American writers, musicians, and visual artists had been struggling with questions of race for a very long time, and I began to rethink how best to address their explicit strivings, to use the word that was chosen by W.E.B. Du Bois, in my own writing and teaching. Here, as you might guess, is where Aaron Neville enters the story. Let us begin by listening to this autobiographical song called To Make Me Who I Am. If this were a full-length lecture, I would also play a series of clips to illustrate his astonishing range of vocal techniques, the assortment of genres and styles he incorporates, his choice of repertoire, and his interpretive decisions, his role within the Neville Brothers band in contrast to his persona as a solo artist, and so forth. However, In this compressed format, we will consider just one example. American race thinking demands that American race thinking demands that we, black folk, constantly perform our blackness. Paradoxically, within this coercion is the mandate of self-reflective choice. Does this entail honest self-revelation or expedient duplicity? And there are lots of examples of both. One must choose constantly. Such is American blackness, a tangle of dilemmas that require outward expression. Listen now to how Aaron Neville chooses to represent himself in this song.
I've walked through this world sometime without a friend. My life has been up and down, been close to an end. 'Cause I know it took who you were and where you came from to make you what you are.
The most riveting aspect of any Aaron Neville's performance is how he sounds. He sings with ease throughout the tenor range and upward through most of the soprano range. Though he sometimes uses falsetto, he's not a falsetto singer as many doo-wop and R&B singers were. Rather, he sings with such clarity, ease, and accuracy in the upper register because he fully engages the strength of his diaphragm and his throat and torso muscles to produce relaxed but powerful breath support. Sometimes he uses his body as a soundboard, producing sympathetic vibrations in a lower register as he sings in a higher register. This is often a startlingly beautiful effect. As members of the great all-male classical ensemble Chandler explained from the Chapin Hall stage a few years ago, it is cultural attitudes and not physical limitations that impede most men from singing in the upper register. In fact, the Chanticleer member who at that time sang the highest countertenor notes was also the one who sang the lowest bass notes. It's a normal thing that can be learned. Thus it is with Aaron Neville. This powerfully built man who once worked as a stevedore on the docks of New Orleans comfortably embodies both strength and vulnerability in his singing. This surprising combination makes his sound very poignant. He is like an entire vocal ensemble embodied in one voice. There are other surprises in Aaron Neville's voice. Quite obviously, he uses various forms of vibrato, which is common among African American singers. However, he also yodels. Aaron often acknowledges how deeply influenced he was in his youth by cowboy singers such as Gene Autry and Roy Rogers. Thus, he has actually incorporated the quavering sound of yodeling into his vocal style. Aaron loves, too, the songs of George Jones, a quite different kind of country singer. Aaron's album, The Grand Tour, takes its title from one of Jones's classic songs. He also uses jazz scatting occasionally, and melisma, a convention often heard in gospel music and contemporary R&B that improvises embellishments involving several notes sung over a single syllable. Yodeling, however, can be surprising for younger Americans, black and white, who mistakenly believe that country music is antithetical to African American culture. On the contrary, I can attest that when I was growing up in Alabama, most black families who owned televisions watched the Grand Ole Opry on Saturdays, before school Monday mornings, and here I'm talking about the segregated school that I attended in Mount Meigs, Alabama. Students of all ages would gather in groups and discuss the various country singers who had performed. We all had favorites and argued over who sang best. Aaron thus reflects a familiar aspect of Southern black culture as it was in his own formative years. To Make Me Who I Am as a narrative has a carefully conceived structure built upon a series of antitheses, up and down, schemer, dreamer, I was, I am, and so forth. These antitheses are not static binary oppositions. Rather, They are dialectical, representing a process of struggle in which negative attributes are transformed into positives. For example, he was once a gang member shooting up with junkies and imprisoned, yet he turned his life around and became a music superstar. The song is a narrative of redemption that resonates with both secular and religious traditions. For me, this is especially interesting because in the African American tradition, secular redemption often indicates the linkage between religion and politics, from spirituals like Go Down Moses to freedom songs of the Civil Rights Movement. Furthermore, the song makes a subtle allusion to Amazing Grace, the most beloved of all the Protestant hymns. Aaron writes, "Once my life was wretched, but why should I regret it? Because it took me who I was and where I've been to make me who I am." The composer of Amazing Grace, John Newton, wrote, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see." The word wretch is the obvious link, and in fact, both men celebrate their redemption from the crimes and incarcerations of their younger days. In addition to his criminal acts, Newton worked on slave ships, where he was notorious for his leadership in the reprehensible routine of selecting particular captive women to drag on deck for the sexual entertainment of the crew. Amazing Grace was written after a harrowing incident when Newton's ship was nearly capsized by a violent storm and many captives were thrown overboard to lighten the load. Some scholars argue that the sweet sound he talks about was the singing of Africans as they faced death on that ship. In any case, Newton subsequently rejected the slave trade, became a minister and an abolitionist, and became a mentor to William Wilberforce, the preeminent leader of the English abolition movement. To a listener, a performer who knows this history, Amazing Grace is more than just a celebration of personal redemption. One can see that the Neville brothers understand the special status of this song and how they use it in the brilliant closing medley of their concert album called Live on Planet Earth. The medley begins with Curtis Mayfield's People Get Ready, followed by Aaron's solo rendition of Amazing Grace. Then it culminates with Bob Marley's One Love. Striving for freedom and striving for spiritual transcendence, both personally and collectively, are completely intertwined. Aaron expresses this form of musical activism concisely. "I've been lucky that I've always had a song. I'll sing it with compassion to try to right the wrong." Clearly, he is an ambitious man, yet modest, an artist of ethical vision. Aaron Neville's voice intrigues me because it is a beautiful object, yet complex in ways that thwart attempts to regard it as simply an object. It embodies an experience of American Blackness that is expansive, passionate, engaging, and inclusive. This voice reveals an artist who is deeply self-reflective, yet not at all self-absorbed. Through his performance as a solo, duet, and ensemble singer, and his active repertoire of over 1,000 songs, Aaron defies the reductive binaries of race and articulates the experience of American Blackness as inquisitive, pluralistic, passionate, and self-aware. Observing how he performs his work has enriched my scholarship and teaching. I hope that my own work will, in turn, ultimately illuminate how the intricate strife of racial discourse and American Blackness constitutes, limits, and expands our collective identity as a bifurcated yet inseparably intertwined nation.